Welcome to the Running for Real podcast, where each week we bring you a conversation designed to help you create positive change in your life, community, and planet. It's a collective of conversations about running, the climate emergency, and social justice. Running for Real is for the brave, for those with courage and vulnerability. United by our love of running, we're driving momentum towards some of the really tough challenges we're facing as humanity. So come join me, Tina Muir, and let's get started. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 244 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me. I am excited you are here. I have loved hearing your feedback about episode 4 of Running Realized. If you have not already checked that out, be sure to go look up Running Realized on your favorite podcast player. The most recent episode that we featured just about 10 days ago was gender on the trail and ultra scene. It was a really interesting episode. It challenged me a lot. And I would love to hear your thoughts if you haven't already listened. So thank you for the feedback that we have been receiving. I appreciate that. And we have another one coming on Monday, the 19th of April, which you can go check out. You can go subscribe if you haven't already and go get it there. But back to Running for Real today, I'm excited to introduce you to Zoe Rome, who is a Trail Runner magazine associate editor. She's also the host of her own podcast called the DNF podcast. She is an accomplished runner herself. She's a journalist. She has all kinds of things that she has done and continues to do for the running community. And you will soon see that we get along very well. We have a lot in common, and I really enjoyed getting to know Zoe today. We are going to go into some different things. This episode didn't really go in where I thought it was going to go, but in a good way. I think some of this is going to be a way to reflect within your own life on your thoughts of things, decisions of things. There may be things for some that are a bit uncomfortable, but I don't think it's in so much of a heavy, a way that's going to make you feel like not good about yourself. I think it's actually going to do the opposite. This episode should be raising us all up, helping us to feel positive about the future and feeling good about things, even if they are changing pretty quickly. And we as humans do not like change. I want to just take a moment to thank one of our sponsors before we get to this episode. So I just want to take a moment to thank Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. As you know, I have been working with Tracksmith for around a year, or just over a year now, and I love reading about how much you are enjoying it too. I recently did a survey to see which products you had purchased that I recommended, and time again it came out with Tracksmith items people are loving. Many of you hadn't heard of them or had heard of them and finally decided to try it, and just was like, oh, I totally see what she's talking about. Their clothes are so well thought out. This Boston-based brand really puts the heart and soul into everything. They really do think about the small details. Now we are getting into the summer months. Isn't that wonderful? I have really been loving the Twilight tank. I wear the Horizon tank just for my day-to-day and for on my runs. I also have a lot of Grey Boys just for casual day-to-day. I basically love everything. I shouldn't even really be telling you suggested items. But my favorite shorts are the Session Speed shorts. As you are listening to this, I would have hopefully completed my first trail marathon, and I am planning on wearing the Session Speed shorts as I record this. I absolutely love them. They are really, really comfortable, and they're one of my favorites. So you can get $15 off your order of $75 or more by using code TINA15 at tracksmith.com. You can also check out Running Realized, which is Tracksmith is sponsoring as well. They have a wonderful journal on their website. You can go to journal.tracksmith.com if you love to read about running culture, get to know other runners, and just be amongst people who are passionate about the sport like yourself. So you can use code TINA15 for $15 off your order of $75 or more. And you can check out some of my favorites by going to tinamuir.com/Tracksmith. And yeah, thank you so much to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode. Let's go meet Zoe. Zoe, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running for a podcast. I am excited you are here.
So glad to be here, Tina.
Yeah, this is funny because I've done a few of these episodes lately where I haven't prepared as much as I had in the past, but it is because in a similar way to my Chris Gethard interview a few weeks ago, people, as I've told you this, we have talked on the phone and immediately clicked. People kept telling me, you've got to meet Zoe. Do you know Zoe? You've got to meet Zoe, like over and over again. And I was like, all right. One day I was like, who is this Zoe? And then I think I followed you on social media. And then I've told you this, every time I logged in, it was like one of your articles was there. And I was like, yes, every time until you've started being when I log in, you are one of the people. If you've done something, it shows.
The algorithm wins.
Yes. So, but then we did connect and we just aligned on so many things. So I'm really excited. And thank you to all those people who have been sending me Zoe for a while now. I'm excited.
I wish it had been Chris Gethard that had made the connection, because that would mean we are friends and that would make me so happy.
Oh, really? But,
I love him.
Yes. I mean, yeah, that was one of my favorite conversations. He is just an amazing human. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear that, though. I didn't know that. Okay, so yeah, in the same style, I didn't really have specific things I wanted to ask, but let's begin with, as you've told me a little bit about this, you came into the running world, or I guess I should let you kind of share some of the things that you're proudest of, or the things that you want to share to the listeners who may not have heard of you for what you do, who you are.
Yeah. So I am Zoe Rome, the associate editor at Trail Runner magazine. I've been in that role for just over 2 years now. It is just absolutely a dream job. I love it because I get to spend a lot of time writing. And one of the things that I didn't anticipate about being an editor, because I primarily wanted that job as a writer, but one of the greatest things about being an editor is you get to look under the hood of other people's writing. It's like, if you really love cars, being a mechanic is kind of a dream job, because you just get to tinker with other people's sometimes far superior engines and learn how to better build your own. And I really love that aspect of editing, is you get to kind of get down and dirty and deconstruct what makes things work, what makes things maybe less efficient linguistically, what makes things really great. And you get to, see what other people are doing and apply that to your own writing. And then you get to spend a lot of time with your own writing as well, and look at it through a more editorial lens, where you can kind of get some distance between yourself and the work, and then revisit it with fresh ideas, fresh perspective, and hopefully a bit more nuance that you can really only get through kind of that more neutral editorial mindset, rather than reading your own writing can sometimes be a little bit of an existential nightmare if you come to it with the wrong approach. Another thing that I really love about it is that I get to do a lot of behind the scenes work in terms of running media, which we all know has a lot of learning and growing to do. Mm-hmm. And I think just being able to push the industry in a direction that I think is more representative of what the sport is and what the sport wants to be. And you get to just make really cool, kind of larger scale systemic changes than I would be able to leverage as just a writer on my own. I'm working towards carbon neutral subscriptions for all of our subscribers. I've never, making a print magazine is amazing. And there's something really special about seeing your writing on a piece of paper, but that has a cost, right? And so I'm really excited to be able to offset the cost of some of that production, so that we can, just allow subscribers to engage with our product in a way that is less detrimental to the environment. And it's just a sign that we're putting our money where our mouth is. I do a lot of reporting on the environment, and it would just be incorrect of me to not push for the changes that I'm advocating others make in my own life and professionally. I get to work with a lot of newer writers that I really love. I love fostering new voices. I love trying to find people who've been overlooked by or straight up passed over by our industry, and try to bring their specific stories and voices to prominence by just, either giving them a platform and helping streamline their writing, so that it isn't everyone needs a little bit of editing. And just sometimes you can just spruce people's writing up a bit and really make it shine. And that's one of the things I love about being an editor. Some of the stuff that no one will ever really see or appreciate or understand, but just like you get to make things a little bit better. It's like being a coach, but for writing. And I love that.
Yeah, actually, I'd love to dig into that a bit more in a few different ways. One being that I would imagine most people listening read a lot of running articles or like learning new things. And so it's interesting for them to hear what goes on behind the scenes and that there is editing behind it. Because I'd love for you to talk about the fact that I'd imagine most people listening are thinking, well, that's great, but they're really good at writing and I'm not a writer. Do you have any thoughts on whether most people, I personally believe that like if you write, and it doesn't matter what capacity, even if it's just a journal that you write a page in each day, you are a writer, you are able to grow and will kind of get your voice will come out essentially. But do you have thoughts on whether people listening who think, well, that they're writers and I'm not a writer? Any thoughts on them? Like, even if it doesn't mean they write for a magazine, but they can still consider themselves a writer or enjoy writing, whatever that looks like. What are your thoughts there?
Totally. I think that if you're, don't let publishing, like the fact that it like gets on print or gets online on a magazine versus a blog or versus a tweet, that to me, like, I don't know, you can tweet and be a writer. You can write great Instagram captions and be a writer. You can journal amazingly and be a writer. I think what to me makes good writing, and I'm going to quote one of my favorite writers and poets, W.H. Auden, it's clear thinking about unclear feelings. And I feel like anything that takes something that everyone kind of feels and maybe hasn't had the language for, and is able to ossify that in a way that other people can relate to it and understand it, that to me is writing. And a lot of things, I think, clear that bar. I think the only thing that really sets writers apart, and I think anyone can be a writer. Like, I'm not here to gatekeep around who is and isn't a writer, because I grew up always wanting to be a writer. It is the only job I've ever considered. And I love being able to do that and to help other people do that too. But I think it's just approaching things with a curiosity and coming in with more questions than answers and having a lot of humility and just trying to approach each character, each setting, each topic with a lot of humility.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to mention. Just as I hear so often people assuming that it's something that you're either born to do or not born, or, good at.
It's just like running, and you have to practice. Like, if the first time you ever write something, you email it to an editor and they're like, thanks, no thanks. Like, that's normal. It's silly to expect that the first time you step up to the plate, you hit it, you make it to third base. Like, that's pretty, there's so few things that we would have those same wild expectations about. But I do feel like sometimes people have that around writing, because in a lot of ways, like, the bar is low. Like, you have paper and a pencil, or email. And we get a lot of pitches where I'm like, wow, you really didn't run this by anyone else before it landed in my email box, which, is fine. We all approach this from different angles and have different expectations about it. But again, there's nothing, I'm not different than other people. I've just been practicing for longer. And what people see of my work is the top 1%. It's like a glacier, and there's just like the stuff under the water is like all this, journaling I've done, a bunch of practice, a bunch of stuff that I'm not proud of, and a bunch of me figuring things out. It's like most of being a runner is the training, and every so often you'll race and you'll get a great result, and everyone's like, this is so great. But they don't see the, all the times you basically had to do the writing equivalent of jogging around the block.
Yes. I think that's so good to mention.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right. So within that, I would love to go into a piece that lets people kind of get to know what you write about, or just something that I think will interest a lot of people. You recently wrote an article about beating the boys, I think was the name of it, or something about that. Can you explain to the listeners who may not have seen that article, and I will put links in the show notes to all the articles we mentioned and all the things we mentioned today, so you can take a good read of it, to that 1% that Zoe has worked hard on. Why is that an important thing to mention? Because hearing the title about beating the boys might initially be like, make people think the article is about something different to what it is. So tell us what was going on there.
Well, firstly, I'm terrible at titling my own pieces, so that's partially my fault. I think one thing I love about this piece is I originally started writing this back in August. So it's been something that had been like sitting on my virtual desktop for a very long time. I had originally started writing it when Courtney Dauwalter set out to break the overall Colorado Trail FKT, and my publisher came to me and was like, you should write about this. This is so incredible. Have you heard of this woman? Apparently she beats all the men at races. And I was like, well, obviously I've heard of Courtney Dauwalter. Like I'm a woman who runs, and I also work in running media. So like, yeah, she's not flying under the radar. But it also made me sad because the only reason this guy had heard of her was because she beat men. And I love her as a person and like what she does so much that I think that like it upset me that the only context he was aware of her was that she had occasionally beat men. Some of her biggest victories, like, at UTMB, like she's done amazing things within the context of like, I mean, just, if you took men out of the equation, she's just amazing. And it just kind of like broke my heart a little bit that for so many people, they only know about her, or they only know about other women's achievements because they managed to beat men. And I think that is the wrong context to examine female excellence through. And I really hate that every time people bring her up, it's like with that little like grain of salt, like, oh, she's so good, she beats men. And while that is amazing, I want people to understand female and not just like, and I think another thing that's challenging is anytime you examine female excellence through these few outliers, like that only ever harms the majority of women. If the bar to clear for being understood as an incredible athlete is to beat men, that's just not that's not the correct bar, because we never talk about men that way. You would never hear a man's excellence qualified in the same way that we're always qualifying female excellence. And that just is upsetting, and I hate it. And another thing that had brought it up for me was seeing Ruth Croft talking about her TerraWare 100K win, and how she was like, I'm totally aware that the reason I got as much media attention as I did is because I got the overall win. And she's an incredible athlete. And like, had 10 men finished ahead of her, it would have been just as amazing a race for her. And I just think that we need to be honest about what the implications are of having that conversation and only shining a spotlight on women when they manage to clear this arbitrary bar that's fully set by men who have essentially, I would say, like, you really only see men that don't have a lot of education in the running space having those conversations. You don't see men who know what they're talking about qualifying female excellence in that way. And I just am worried about the implications of making it seem like to be an excellent woman, you have to be this good. Because if I was like, as a woman, I internalized that and I'm like, if I'm never going to break the male FKT, does it even matter? Or like when I've told friends about my race results, they're like, wait, you got first overall? That's amazing. And I'm like, no, first female. And they're like, oh, well, okay. Like it's lesser than. And I hate that because it's not. Like, I will validate my excellence on my own terms, and I don't need men's yardstick to measure myself against, because that's just not, that defies logic, that defies biology. And I don't feel that it facilitates a more inclusive space for particularly female athletes. And I wanted to write about that in a way that was sensitive and discussed my own sensitivity around that. As, I think someone in the trail running space, like, I have a not insignificant amount of internalized misogyny. And I need to not compare myself to men because that's not helpful or realistic. And I wanted to open up space for people to agree and disagree with me on those terms, because, some people did disagree. I think that's fantastic. But I do think that, and like, some of the feedback I got was like, why are you defending, these gender binary terms? And like, I'm not a huge fan of the gender binary out in the real world, but I do feel that having those categories in terms of competition facilitates equity. And I do believe that dissolving them does no one a favor. The grain of salt to that being, I also believe that athletes should be able to compete as their identified gender. And some people tried to turn that op-ed around to say, like, here's proof that they shouldn't. And that's not where I was going with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the tricky part of doing what you do, is that your words can always be taken and maybe used to contradict something else you've said, to say like, you don't even know you can't even make up your mind here because you're saying this, but you're saying that. And that is tough. And before we go deep, I would love to go deeper into, some of the things that come up within that. But for the women listening or for the men listening, what would be your suggestion or what are some things that you see women have internalized, like thoughts that they may have or things that they may have caught themselves doing that are because of, conversations like that or sentences like that? And then what can be done by the men and the women listening, or anyone who is listening right now, to limit that, to change that, to make sure that the next generation doesn't have a caveat to every woman's performance?
Pay attention to your media diet and how the people that you're reading and listening to and responding to, how they discuss men and how they discuss women, and notice what the differences are. Because I promise you, when you pay attention, you will see that there are differences, both in the quantity of coverage and in the quality of coverage. And once you become aware of that, it's very hard to unsee it. Pay attention to who's writing those things too. There's a huge, I notice, particularly in trail running media, a very big difference in how men write about women as compared to how women write about women. And I am a huge fan of inviting a lot more women into the sports media space because I think it leads to better coverage overall. I remember being assigned to write about UTMB by a male editor, and I wrote about the American men didn't do so great. And then I focused because that's the story of UTMB. And then the women come out swinging, have all these great success. And I wrote about these specific women and what their results were. And then I turned it into my editor, and he changed it so that the places these women who had gotten 6th, 7th, he changed it so that it looked like they got 87th overall. And I was like, that is literally in what world does that make sense? What are you you're a professional in this space. How do you not know this? How have you been allowed to become an editor and you aren't aware of the fact that there are 2 different gender categories at UTMB? And we need to call out and call in when people make these mistakes so that we can all learn and grow together and have more equitable coverage that just does better service to to all athletes, right? It's not about, it's not about hyper focus on women. It's just, let's get to equity, right? And to do that, we need to notice where we're falling short and have honest conversations about why. And a lot of times it's because the people in power who are assigning these pieces, who are editing these pieces, who are writing these pieces, who are publishing these pieces, they don't look like the people who are running these races. And that's a huge mistake. We need to have people who understand the sport and who understand what it means to be undercovered, what that looks and feels like. Because for me, I can be winning a race and I'll finish about the same time as dudes who are having an off day. And so it's hard because you get under the inflatable arch, you're ecstatic because you've just won, and people are packing up their lawn chairs and no one cares because you didn't finish very first. And that's sometimes how it feels to be a woman in trail running media, as well as you might have just achieved something excellent. You might be talking about this story that's very resonant within your space. And then a whole bunch of dudes are packing up their lawn chairs because it's no longer about them.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, as someone just entering into that world, I haven't really seen that too much. But even within the road running world that I come from, I have seen a lot of situations where, particularly there's still, even just within the race, there's still that struggle within men who are around the top women to accept and be okay with a woman around them. I mean, I'm sure most of the women listening have experienced that situation as to where some man who's finishing, 57th wants to finish 56th because it means he's ahead of you.
Or once I was winning a race and I was running with a guy and he was like, "Hey, have you ever done speed work? You should check that out." And I was like, are you explaining speed work to me in the middle of a race where I'm about to drop you? That's so condescending.
Yeah. I mean, I've had so many of those situations, and it's just, it gets to you after a while. And I don't know about you, but I even found it would affect my training because it made me just so angry with men in general, that any man who was near me, I wanted to be ahead of, just to like prove a point, to prove it back again, to be like, I deserve to be here. And so, we do have a long way to go in terms of, just making it where women's accomplishments can be celebrated as a thing of their own, and to where it isn't threatening to have a woman around you. So thank you for bringing that up. Now, this isn't directly related to that, but I want to make sure we go back to it. You mentioned to me before that you came into the running world a bit later. You didn't take the maybe traditional track of a lot of distance runner. I'd love for you to share that, because I think a lot of people, a lot of recreational runners can be misled to think that most runners come into things in the same way. And if they start running in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, that they're behind and they're never going to be a real runner and all that. So I'd love for you to share, as someone who is an influence in the running space, how you came into the sport.
Yeah, I had a pretty inauspicious start. I tried out for my high school cross country team and didn't make it. In fact, the coach was like, "You look like a jumper. Can you jump? You're pretty tall." Try out for volleyball and maybe come back for track in the spring. I was like, all right. And the tryout was fully just running 2 miles, and I definitely walked a good bit. But I like always had this thing inside me where I just wanted to be a runner. Like something about that identity spoke to me, whether or not I was really running. And, you know, it sucked to be told by adults that I didn't fit that standard that they had set, and that I wasn't welcome in that space quite yet. But I, played volleyball and was like always like one of the faster on line drills and kept running. And there was a time where every day after school during high school, I would take my volleyball shoes to the track and I would do like 1 lap around without stopping. And I was like, this is pretty epic. I'm really becoming a runner now. This is basically what track workouts are, I'm sure, just doing a 400 and then walking home. And I did that for like 2 years. And I kept running through college. I never trained seriously. I just had like a Casio watch that would tell, like I would run for time. I have no idea how far or fast I was going. Eventually I did upgrade to a GPS watch, and I would run like really small local races. Like the first race I ever did was an 8K. And I did like pretty well. I ended up like podiuming.
Wow.
Very kind of out of nowhere. But I was also at the same time, I was working as a backpacking guide. So I was like hiking a lot in the summers, running on roads a lot in the winter. And I was like, ooh, what if I combine these things? And I signed up for a trail race and ended up winning, and was like, oh, this is great. Like and it's like a lot slower or the race I had done was like more technical. So it was like slower, and I didn't feel bad for walking during it. So I immediately signed up for a 50K, as one does after completing a 10K. Obviously that progression just like made a lot of sense to my 20-year-old brain. And I ended up winning that 50K on some pretty marginal training. And I think everyone's had that experience of like really for the first time being able to like make eye contact with what they view their potential as being. And I was like, wow, like if I maybe am a little bit more organized and intentional around things, I can, instead of winning on accident, I can start to win things on purpose. And that kind of became my drive, was to just be curious about what my potential was. It wasn't really to win. Like I'm not an excessively competitive person in that space, but I really am so curious about like how good can someone that was, told that they weren't a runner, at age like 17 be, and I just feel like it's not necessarily about proving people wrong, but about being like, oh yeah, I was totally right about the fact that I'm a runner the whole time, and being really curious about how far I can take that. And I think because of that, I've always had a fairly healthy perspective on competition and training. I mean, like every athlete that gets serious, there's always like ups and downs with making sure I don't attach too much of my self-worth to external results, or like what kind of mileage I'm running or how fast. And really, I always try to get back to that space of just being like always pleasantly surprised at what I'm capable of, and trying to be curious and really kind of push that envelope and be courageous about, trying to be as good as I can be and seeing how far I can take that. And I think the fact that I wasn't competitive as a younger person allowed me to foster those things very much on my own internally, rather than having a coach or maybe some external force, a grown-up dictate those things for me. Like I very much came to running on my own terms. And I definitely started running ultras a little bit early, but like I wasn't doing track workouts in college. I was not trying to get better in any meaningful way. I was just kind of running consistently for fun because I loved it. And I think that, the story of that is if someone tells you that you're not a runner, they could be wrong. Yeah. And you should just keep running anyway because you love it. And that's really the only good reason to run, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. Are there any things, you mentioned at the beginning about being able to overlook people's work or just just naturally by the position you have, you get to see a lot of perspectives as runners. Are there some things that you see from not coming at it as the high school to college to then to, road to trail or whatever, like the normal progression people take? Are there some advantages that you've seen by coming at it this way?
I think so. I think just kind of like a wide-eyed, childlike wonder of like, oh my God, humans can run 100 miles. Like, that's crazy. Yeah. Who knew, like, I didn't know that was a thing until I, kind of got into the trail world. I was like, that's crazy. Is that safe? How do you do that?
Still feel like that now.
Yeah. Right. And I think trying to maintain and cultivate that, because I think, there can be this thing, like particularly in running media, you have these people that have just been so in this echo chamber, and they like know, every runner and what shoe company they've ever worked with, and they can like rattle off all these results. And I'm very much not that person. Like, I can't tell you what like any of my PRs are, because that's just not that interesting to me. And I think that unburdens me to focus on the things that I find interesting and to follow my natural curiosity towards stories, because, I've been a writer a lot longer than I've been a runner, and to try to let that side of my brain lead my work rather than necessarily the data focused side or the like hyper, the getting into the minutia. And I think that my goal as a writer is to make running more inclusive and to bring more people into the tent and to grow the tent. And I think being someone that I wouldn't say I'm, I think having a bit more of an outsider perspective rather than coming in with like a bunch, like occasionally I'll read other runner writers like Instagram bios and like everyone has their like marathon PR listed. And if I did that, mine would be like 4:16 marathon, like it would be so unimpressive. It would just be comical to like a lot of running media professionals. But I also think it just gives me a lot of space to approach things from a different angle and to be that like fun, cool voice that's not necessarily, being like, well, I'm a 2:30 marathoner, so like this is what's 100% correct. Because I don't have all the answers. And the only reason I made it to where I am is because I started reading, stuff and felt seen by it and kept pursuing it. And I just want to write stuff that allows other people to feel seen, that allows people who haven't always been included in the space to be directly spoken to in a way that's dignified and human. And I think that you can do that no matter what your 5K PR is, but just getting too bogged down and like trying to be like the perfect runner and like have all these accolades and like have been the NCAA whatever champion. Like I played Quidditch a bit in college. Like I am not, I was not like a great athlete. So I think that really just frees me up intellectually and creatively to pay attention to the things that I find interesting as a human first and a runner second.
Thank you to Inside Tracker for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Do you want to run further and faster and recover quicker and easier? Do you need to feel healthier than you've ever felt before? You need to make a change, and that is what Inside Tracker is all about. Founded by leading scientists in aging, genetics, and biometric data from MIT, Tufts, and Harvard, Inside Tracker is a personalized health and wellness platform like no other. So what is their secret? Well, first, Inside Tracker uses its patented algorithm to analyze your body's data and offer you a clearer picture than you've ever had before of what's going on inside you. Then, Inside Tracker provides you with concrete, science-backed, trackable action plan for reaching your performance goals and being your healthy best. You want to hear the great part? Inside Tracker is offering my listeners 25% off. Yes, 25% off discount to their entire store. All of the options you can look at there. You can go to insidetracker.com/Tina because change is an inside job.
I played Quidditch a bit in college. Like I am not, I was not like a great athlete. So I think that really just frees me up intellectually and creatively to pay attention to the things that I find interesting as a human first and a runner second.
I love that perspective. And that's such a good way of looking at it. I mean, as someone who was all about the numbers and had to be in many ways, although I don't know if you have to be. I feel like I could argue definitely that you wouldn't have to be, but I felt I had to be. And then now when I same as you, have really let go of a lot of the numbers. When people ask me how many marathons that I've done, I have to like think it in my head. Like I can't remember. I have to remember where they were. Like there's a lot of like the normal things that people remember. I've either forgotten or just don't feel the need to bring up. But then I don't know. I really love that. Yeah, it definitely frees you up. And I find it quite hard because people ask me all the time these questions and I just don't know the answers. But
I feel particularly for women, sometimes these questions are leveraged against us as a way of being like, prove your worth. It's like, oh, you like this band? Name 5 of their albums, but for running. And I don't love that. Like, you can't use this against me because I just don't have that information. It just like slides right off, Like if you're going to try to use my worth as a runner to also like validate my worth as a writer, like good luck. I just don't equate those two things at all. And the data's not even there. So you just can't.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And then did that experience of not making the high school team or what experience was it in your life that you felt really turned you towards making people feel included? And you said there, it sounds so logical. Why would the running community not want to make sure everyone feels included? I mean, like, duh, like, shouldn't that be number one on the list? But it isn't. So, and especially not for many people. So what was it about your life that kind of shone a light on that and made that be something you wanted to focus on?
I think initially it was a little bit of that insecurity from being told that I wasn't an athlete and that, when people looked at me, like they didn't see the potential I believed was there. But I also think that, trying to use like high school insecurities to drive my professional career, like that only has so much mileage. I do think like now I work with a coach, David Roche, and the first time we talked, he was like, you can be a great athlete. Like, let's do it. And that was the first time any like adult had ever told me I could be an athlete. And it was so impactful to me. And I want to believe in everyone in that same way. Cause I think if you just acknowledge people that you see potential in them, because everyone has that potential. We just, are sometimes not always comfortable about admitting it to ourselves or to the world generally. But, I think a lot of times we tend to build less inclusive spaces when we're not okay with ourselves and when we're insecure about ourselves. So if you feel that culturally or in the running space that you're losing your cachet, that you're losing power, you're going to cling to that harder than ever. If you feel that suddenly the spotlight is being turned off of you, you're going to be upset when it's turned on to other people, just because historically it's been on you the whole time. And so I always really try to check myself when I feel insecure and make sure I'm not doing work from that place of like a scarcity mindset and that I am secure in my worth as a person. And because I'm secure in that, I acknowledge that in every other person. And I will always create things that acknowledges and dignifies that same worth and that same value in every other person, no matter, what their marathon PR is, like what their background is. And I think for so long, we've just been using the wrong yardstick to measure people. And that's just led us to a really myopic view of what a runner is, what an athlete is. And when we expand that, I think that sometimes people approach this with a very zero-sum mindset, right? Like more attention paid to these issues means less for me. For me, I'm like, let's grow the pie. Like we don't need to just cut up smaller pieces.
Yes.
This thing can be infinite if we just try, and we haven't been trying. And anyone that tells you it's a zero-sum game, that's a person that's just insecure in what their position in this culture is. And we can't let our curiosity be guided by that fear. We have to lean into what we know is true. And that's that every human is valuable and every human can be an athlete in a way that's meaningful to them.
So I would love your perspective, as you are so thoughtful with this topic, on someone who's listening and thinking, okay, I can kind of understand what you're saying with the pie, but the reality is there are only so many spaces. So if I Okay. If I am someone who was in the running space and I was finishing third in my age group consistently, and that really meant something to me. That those awards I kept on my mantle. I was really proud of finishing third in the female, 40 plus category. And now, the space is becoming more inclusive. There's all different people, but I do lose out because now I'm not winning those age group awards. And that's a very specific example. Yeah. And I'm trying to do that intentionally so that I'm not offending anyone, but we can all understand it. It's right. For someone who's saying, but it is affecting me. What would you say there?
I do understand that. And it's, I guess my first point would be that your value does not depend on that age group category win. And we all know that, but it's we all cling to that too in ways. And so, I see that, I hear that, I feel that all the time. As a competitive person, what makes me excited is the most competitive start line imaginable. I am not interested in signing up for a race that hasn't made an intentional effort to be inclusive, because I don't want to win things by just because no one else showed up. I want to win knowing that I was there with the most amount of competitors who brought their freaking A game. That is what inspires me as an athlete, knowing that I did my best with other people who are doing their best. And that's how we all get better together. And I think that seeing it as oh, they win, so I lose. When you're running with faster, more competitive people, you're going to run faster and more competitively too. It really is even though yes, sometimes it means that you're going to get knocked off the podium. But that competition can be this thing where a rising tide can lift all boats. And I think it just comes down to, understanding that is the reframing it so that is your understanding of it. And knowing that when other people win, that's not your loss. That's a win for everyone. That's more people competing. That's getting third in a non-competitive field. I'm not going to feel that great about myself, but getting that same result or a lower down result in a more competitive field, that's freaking awesome. I think that's just the reframe we all need to make, not just because it's, necessary and appropriate and the only ethical thing to do, but because that's just how competition works, right? People don't want to go to the Olympics because it makes them feel good or whatever. They want to go, so that's the most competitive field. You want to be in those competitive spaces. And I think that inclusivity means better competition. And I think that is awesome and a really great way to frame this.
Yeah. I like that way of thinking. Actually, when I had Chris Gethard on, he knew basically nothing about running, and he was spinning it around and asking me questions, and he did ask about the competitiveness of races, and if it was okay, these two people are going to beat me, this person's going to, I'm trying to beat them, this person's way behind me. And I said it wasn't that simple, but then to me, I always struggled as an elite being able to just looking at people as well, I have to beat you and I have to beat you, and being wait a minute, shouldn't we all be trying to want each other to do our best? And it's we all did our best and whoever came out on top came out on top,
right. I always instead of a race to the bottom, we need to push each other forward.
Yeah. I always found that so hard that I would have to see my competitors as enemies that I had to beat in order to be good enough. And yeah, I mean, these conversations are happening, which helps. But yeah, I always really struggled with that.
I think particularly for women, we're socialized to view each other as competitors for scraps rather than understanding that the more we lift each other up, the more there is to go around for everyone. And we're so so little attention has been paid to us. We're just getting to the point where people are oh yeah, equitable prize money is a thing. And so it's no surprise that that's the mindset that a lot of us bring to this sport. I think that that's understanding that is the first step. It is totally normal and understandable that that's the approach that a lot of women bring. But let's challenge ourselves to not see each other as competitors for remaining scraps. Let's all lift each other up and grow this tent, demand attention be paid to us by collaborating through competition.
Yes, thank you. And I think that can apply to everyone listening within your inversion. It doesn't have to be if you're at the very front of the race. You can. And I think women further back in the middle of the pack are generally better at, being supportive. It does get worse as you get higher up. But I think we can all do that in some version of our own life, and we are seeing it more at the top level. So that's helping the situation. Before we get on to a different topic, a lot of the things that you cover in your work are, quite challenging the status quo, challenging these stereotypes, trying to change things. As someone who gets told to stay in her lane all the time, tell us about how that weighs on you, having to constantly feel like everything you're saying, people are just finding reason to like fight, push back against you, or saying, stop trying to change everything. How do you handle that, like, yourself emotionally?
Yeah. So one of my favorite journalists, Diane Reams, who is an NPR legend, has this quote that necessary conversations will to spark or to create light. Sometimes you have to have a little bit of heat. And the idea is to focus on things that bring a little more light than heat, but the heat's inevitable. You don't want to just bring heat, right? Like that's when people, do these like popular social media hot takes, like just to, stir up stuff. And that's absolutely not what I'm trying to do. I want to make a running media that feels authentic to me and speaks to me and other people like me and unlike me. And we just there hasn't been a lot of that. I'm a fairly young person. I am demographically very different than the majority of the Trail Runner magazine audience. And I think that's incredibly powerful. I think if I'm only writing stuff, like if I'm writing stuff where everyone's like, oh yeah, I totally agree with this, like that's not that interesting intellectually and socially. I don't think it does any good. Like if you're just preaching to the choir, that's not, I don't know, like what's the point of that? You're not pushing anything forward. So I think necessarily writing about tough things is going to create pushback, but it is super hard just because, I'll put a lot of myself, like I'll put my vulnerabilities about struggling with my own internalized misogyny. I'll put stuff about how I also struggle with feeling like I'm not doing enough for the climate, that I'm not being a good enough ally. I'll be very honest about those things, and people will, it's like you put your scab out there for the world to pick at, and people absolutely do. But, the haters are always the loudest voices. Like most people, if they read something that they like medium agree with to really like on the internet, they're not going to comment on it. But if you're a grumpy dude who reads something that challenges your status in the running world in a way that you are uncomfortable with, like, yeah, you're going to let me know about it. And I think that there's always going to be people like that. But I like to think that there's a lot more people whose minds have been opened by what I'm writing about, because my mind has been opened by lots of things that I've read and experienced and listened to. And I just have to hope that much quieter, slow burn of a process is happening in less audible internet, out of the internet echo chamber. I also, it's, again, people who have been at the top of the food chain, anytime you question their right to that position, and if we should even have positions at all, people are going to fight back because they've been profiting from, in some way, that position. And anytime you undermine people's cultural cachet, they're going to be upset about it if they have that zero-sum mindset. But I think the thing that keeps me going is really trying to tune my moral compass and knowing that what I'm doing, I fully and authentically believe in, and always getting feedback from people I trust. I run my writing by friends, editors, and I say, here's what I'm really trying to say. Does this accomplish that? Or like trusting people to say, like, am I off base on this? Not that I ever want to water down my opinions, but I want to make sure that I am conveying my authentic beliefs, in a way that makes sense to other people, in a way that they can, in a way that they're invited to agree with and disagree with. Like, that's why it's an opinion. And I think that just like consistently affirming to myself that anytime you challenge people, anytime you challenge power structures, you're going to get pushback. And if you don't, it's because you're uplifting those power structures. And that is not what I became a writer. I did not become a writer to like make people who are already doing okay feel better about themselves. I'm here to challenge myself. I'm here to challenge our culture. I'm here to challenge the media. I'm here to challenge trail running, because I fully believe it can be this amazing, inclusive, wonderful place that I sometimes like see glimmers of, and then it's just not all the way there. And I am like a control freak, and I want it to be all the way there. And I'm always trying to leverage my writing to like fit these things into place and to just help other people, like expand other people's maybe visions of what a trail runner can be and what this culture could look like if we just tried a little bit harder and if we just set aside our insecurities and egos and listen to other people's stories. Because I think journalism is amazing and impactful, but I really love the more like softer story, like less about like facts, more about like, because people will disagree with facts, just like facts never change people's mind. It is very hard to discount other humans' lived experiences. And so the more I can share those lived experiences with our audience, I think that is so, so incredibly powerful, because people can disagree with me and my thoughts and opinions all they want. That's fine. You cannot disagree with people's lives. And I think that for me as a storyteller, being able to bring those stories, those lived experiences to the front is what really animates me.
Thank you to Momentous for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I am really thankful to be working with this company, and I keep teasing to you, but I still can't say anything just yet. But there is some really exciting changes that they are making to really make a big reduction in their carbon footprint. I can't really say much more than that at this point, but I feel really, really good about the direction the company is going in. And I just feel like they care. So I'm excited to share more about that sometime soon. Now, I've mentioned each of the products that I use through this podcast, and I am actually testing out one of the new ones, which is Brain Drive, which is to kind of optimize your thinking as I struggle to think, optimize your focus. And it's something that I just want to make sure that I give some time before I speak out about. But so far, I've really been enjoying it and finding it very helpful when I have my little bursts of time where I can do work in the mornings. And so that's been something really helpful. I have mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, I have really been enjoying the Elite Sleep. I have had a few nights where I could tell I was flustered and unable to sleep. And when I have taken that before bed, I have found it to really help me to settle my mind and to drift off to sleep, even when there is a lot on my mind. And I've never really found that before, especially when I've tried to just use melatonin on my own. So I definitely am enjoying the Momentous Elite Sleep. And also, I have been really trying out the creatine lately, not all the time. I'm not trying to bulk myself up, but it's just been an enjoyable thing that I can use. And if you are an older athlete, that is something that's really going to help your body with some of the things that occur with aging. That is, by taking additional creatine, it's going to help your body to balance out the changes that your body is going to be going through losing that muscle mass that's going to happen over time. So you can get 20% off your order at livemomentous.com. That's livemomentous.com. By using code TINA, you can get 20% off your order. Go check them out. They've got lots of other products on there you can go check out. And thank you so much to Momentous.
People can disagree with me and my thoughts and opinions all they want. That's fine. You cannot disagree with people's lives. And I think that for me as a storyteller, being able to bring those stories, those lived experiences to the front is what really animates me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty clear from just the way you talk about that, the enthusiasm and passion you have there. And I appreciate that and very much feel the same way. Just to be devil's advocate for that group, we talked a little bit about the pie. But for those men who are saying, well, yeah, but everything is coming from me. It's like, I maybe I haven't benefited. It's hard to say definitely have benefited. Maybe a man listening understands that I have benefited from the way things were structured in the past, but it feels like my side, quote unquote, is not being considered here. Everything is I'm almost being made the evil person here. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting responses I got to my Beating the Boys op-ed is one person was like, you shouldn't focus on elite women at all. You should focus on the mid-packers. And I was kind of like, it would feel weird to me to like, because I'm just trying to be like, let's focus on the elite fields equally. And then you have some people being like, oh, let's focus on the middle fields. And I'm kind of like, I don't want to I feel weird giving more air to that conversation when I don't feel like we fully aired out the, we haven't reached equity or parity even close. But I do understand that impulse of being like, I want let's focus on the middle a bit more. And there are ways to do that without it being to the detriment of like parity at the front. Some ways, but it also felt like a very out of like left field response to like, let's pay attention to women. Someone saying, no, let's pay attention to the middle. And it's kind of like, well, it doesn't really fit with my, like, how does that work? Like, you clearly feel threatened by this in some way. And I feel threatened by you telling me that, like, as an elite woman, like, I don't get to have my time. It's time to focus on the middle. And so I think just, again, like not letting insecurity drive these things, I think, is just the key, and understanding the deep why behind every story we tell and every story we pay attention to. If you notice that everything you read and consume makes you feel warm and fuzzy and good about yourself, I would say you should diversify your media diet. Not that you should like rage read things, because that's not productive. I think you should find media, both in terms of the sports world and outside of that, challenges you in a way that you can start to work through things productively and start to develop your sense of like, oh yes, this is like, aha, I understand why I agree with this, why I'm reading it, why it makes me feel the way it does, or not, and start to just really genuinely, more thoughtfully and mindfully consume things. I understand that impulse of feeling like things are being taken away from you. But if you feel like things are being taken away from you, it's because you already have the things. So understanding that feeling necessarily means that you've had power. If you feel like you're losing power and you're losing cultural significance, it's because you had it. So let's even the playing field. And again, it's not a zero-sum game. The more people that we bring into the sport, the more attention can be paid to everyone generally. If we have more runners, like running media will also grow, coverage will grow, coverage will become more equitable. It's not about like, there's plenty of it to go around, but I think it just all starts in that scarcity mindset. And again, people that have had the power, as soon as they feel like that's starting to slip away, those are going to be the people that are the loudest about feeling like things are unequal, or the people who the inequality has been benefiting all along. So if you have that feeling, and I understand that feeling because I have had it too, and it does not make you a bad person, it just means we need to think more deeply about why we feel that way and what situations have led us to feel like we deserve the attention being paid to us, and what it means to deserve attention and who we grant that attention to, because it is a decision that we make every single day in what we read, what we write about, and who we listen to.
Yes, thank you so much. Speaking of who we listen to, tell us about the DNF podcast. For the listeners who have been enjoying Running Realized, this is another like produced episode, produced podcast, although Zoe does it all herself, which is just mind-blowing to me, knowing how much work goes into this. But tell the listeners about what it is and, what made you decide to want to do that?
Yeah. So I had been working at a public radio station and was really excited about podcast development when I got hired at Trail Runner magazine. And I was hired under the condition that I would be allowed to start my own podcast, because that was what I wanted to do more than almost anything. But I wanted it to be different. So kind of, concept unseen, they hired me and allowed me to develop a podcast with really minimal oversight. And I wanted it to be different, not just in format. I wanted to do an NPR style, long form, sonically rich storytelling format rather than an interview. And I wanted it to be about things that we don't often get to hear about. When you listen to a lot of podcasts, particularly in the trail running space, you get a lot of like two dudes talking about why they're so rad. And that's great. And I'm glad they exist. And I wanted to make something totally different because I wanted something that I wanted to listen to. And I didn't feel like that podcast was being made quite yet. I wanted something that would tickle my earbuds and stimulate my intellect and just tell me a story. And that's what I made. And I feel like it does a lot of the same things Running Realized does too. And I'm such a huge fan just because I'm a production nerd. I love production and I love listening to things that are just like thoughtfully done, that are clean and sound nice and don't catch on my ears in weird ways. I have very sensitive little earsies, and that just really make an honest effort at storytelling rather than, just like a free-flowing conversation, because I think there's a time and a place for that. But I, as a storyteller, love being in the driver's seat. I love I think, we're all limited in the ways we can be our own best storyteller about ourselves. And I love when people surrender that control of their narrative to me. And I think in a lot of ways, it's finding that balance between like, how do I make sure I'm honoring this person's story and making it speak to something that resonates with me. So it's finding the hyper individual in the universal. So talking about maybe something difficult like eating disorders or divorce in a way where even if you've never struggled with either of those things, it still speaks to the deep human fact that we all struggle with insecurity. We all feel like we're not enough. Anytime you get two humans in a relationship together, it's going to get weird. Relationships are hard. And how do we talk about those things in a way where the scaffolding of that narrative building is someone else's very specific story. And then I flesh it out with just kind of these more universal thoughts, themes, and ideas that we all relate to.
Yeah, it's beautifully done. And I think you're right that even if you haven't experienced what the topic is for that episode, like you mentioned about the divorce one, Kintsugi, is that the name of it? For me, I haven't been through a divorce, but we all are going to come into meeting people who have had been through a divorce or who have struggled with an eating disorder. And it's not like when that person is going through that, you can say what does that feel like? Tell me how you feel. Tell me what I can do. But this gives you the experience and understanding of this is what they're working through, and then you can be a better friend to that person. So that's one thing that I love about that, is that it allows you to not only grow, but also to be there for the people that you love, because most of the topics are things we're going to come across within our lives. So I really love that. And I will put links in the show notes for people to go listen to that. Now, as much as I originally intended this to be the focus of the episode, we have not really covered the environmental justice side of things. But you have covered that on other podcasts. I know recently you did cover that with Strength Running Jason Fitzgerald. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes for people to go listen to. And I would just love it. Is there anything for people listening who, you've covered so much on the environmental side of things. You and I are absolutely on the same page with this, but I would love for you to just give one thing you would like to remind the listeners. Maybe it is about feeling hopeless or helpless, that I can't do everything right. I'm failing this. I'm dooming the world. What would you like to leave listeners with in terms of what they can do about the climate change crisis we are in?
Yeah, I would say that you can be hugely impactful. And one of the most impactful things you can do is participate in collective action. So that's things like voting, any kind of political organizing, joining groups, anything that you do where you cease to be an individual is the most impactful thing you can do. So focus a little bit less on making sure, I'm the person who'll just soak peanut butter jars and scrub them with an inch of their life. And I can be a perfectionist about things, and that's not very helpful. In fact, I think it can tend to distract me from the very good hard work that is more impactful. So don't get bogged down in being perfect and always having your reusable straw. Instead, pay attention to what's going on. Write your senators very frequently, letting them know that what kind of climate action you would like to see from the top down. Join a local group, because I think people can be most impactful locally. And I know that sounds like a hippie thing that everyone tells you, but it's so, so true. You are going to make a larger impact in your neighborhood, in your hometown, than you are almost anywhere else. So find out what issues are most relevant to your local ecosystem, neighborhood, whatever it is. And start there. Don't worry about being a perfect vegan or a perfect recycler or never driving. Definitely minimize driving. Definitely minimize meat consumption. Definitely try to trend in a positive direction, but don't worry about being perfect. We've been told primarily by bad actors in this world that the world being saved depends on me never eating an egg or using a paper straw again, and that's just not true. You can be very imperfect while still advocating for large scale systemic change in a way that's going to be a lot more impactful than wringing your hands about driving to the grocery store. And I definitely tend to fall into that mindset. And I always have to remind myself that feeling of impotence is a political tool that is leveraged against well-meaning people like us to prevent us from doing the very hard, meaningful work that must be done, which is holding large corporations, government to account day in and day out in a bunch of ways that are very unsexy. They don't they don't really show up on Instagram unless you gram your letter to your senator or yourself in the ballot box. But anything that you can do to affect these large systems is going to be the most impactful climate change you can make. So I'm not going to get into internet fights with people about how they should eat or if they should drive to races or not. I'm going to tell you to be in repeated touch with your political representatives. And if you feel that they're not doing their job, you should vote them out of office or you should run for office. Anything you can do to change systems rather than focus on things in your own life is time a little bit better spent. And if that allows you to cling to things a little bit more softly and allow you to have more grace and compassion towards yourself and to stay in the fight, then I'm all for it. For so long, we've just been told that we need to be perfect to move the needle. And that's just not true, because you could be perfect and the needle still wouldn't move. What we need to do is have these bad actors who are not striving towards any kind of perfection to do their share. And I think that, that can be scary at first, but if you just make it a habit, if you're the kind of person that believes they can run 100 miles or heck, even 30 miles, you can write your senator, you can make a difference, vote like crazy when the time comes, particularly in smaller elections, particularly in local elections. Pay attention to who's on your planning and zoning commission. A lot of these things have super, super big implications, and they're not the things that the media pays attention to and that we're taught to believe are climate action. But those are the things that tend to move the needle a lot more frequently than avoiding yogurt does.
Yeah. Well, one thing I do want to say is I would say anyone who can run a mile, 3 miles, 5 miles, if you are a runner, you definitely can have your impact.
Exactly.
And just wanted to add there, as 30 miles may be a little bit too far for many people, including me. I've never run that far.
I'm just thinking, particularly in the world of trail running, I'll publish something where I'm do anything. And people are like, this is too much to ask. And I'm like, this is the same screen name that I saw comment on the training plan for running 200 miles. So you can do it.
Yes, so true. And thank you for mentioning, at the local level. And I want to actually bring up, I think you said you listened to How to Save a Planet podcast.
Yes.
So they talked a few weeks ago. I can put the link in, I'm trying to think which episode it was, where they talked about Ayana, Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, she's a marine biologist. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She talked about how to find your niche of what area of climate is most important to you. And so she's got this little Venn diagram that you can go fill out. So if you are struggling to figure out which, where do I work? I know for me, for some reason, my obsession is waste, particularly plastic, but waste. That's my and I know that's a passion one for you, but for me, that's my definite obsessive area. And so it helps you to figure out, okay, what can I do within my community? So I will put a link to that as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I thought it was totally brilliant and so touching, and not exactly what I'd always think a scientist. I thought it would be some very you must reduce your carbon footprint by exactly this much. But it's this very soul forward approach to how to make a difference in your world and your community.
So true. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Zoe, anything else you would like to tell the listeners before we go today? I really appreciate your time, but I love if there's any other messages from any area of your life you'd like to share with the listeners.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Cool. Yes. Great way to finish. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate you and all that you do. And remember, listeners, to go check out the DNF podcast, and you can go find lots of Zoe's articles in the show notes today. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much, Tina.
Before we end this episode, I just want to take a moment to shout out my podcast editor, Jeremy Nessel, who has done such a wonderful job of looking after my podcast, taking out all the mishaps in the episodes, while still keeping in the vulnerability and the realness and the rawness of the conversation. This is not one of those podcasts where I take out the ums and the ers and the sometimes the delay in words, because I think it's very important to keep that authenticity. We're surrounded by perfected and manicured everything, and I think it's really important that Running for Real stays that way. So thank you to Jeremy for your work. I also want to thank Maria Vargas and Amber Moore, who are also part of my team. They've been a big part of this community and me being able to build this brand. So just want to give them a shout out too. All right, let's get right back to the end of this episode. Zoe and I have some very exciting things in the works for the future, and I cannot wait to share that information with you very soon. I really enjoyed getting to know her more, just hearing a bit under the hood about what it's like as a editor, as a writer. You know, we see these people around, and I don't know about you, but I've often wondered about that. So it's cool to get to know that a little bit more, and just to get to know her a little bit more. I really appreciate all that she does. You can go find her on social media by going to carrot_flowers_Z on Instagram. That is her Instagram account. And you can also go find her on Twitter by going to at Zoe H. Rome. That's ZOEHROM. Zoe, I really appreciate all that you are doing. Keep it up. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this episode, Tracksmith. As I mentioned, you can get $15 off your order of $75 or more by using code TINA15. Go get yourself some of those session shorts, or maybe a Harrier tank or a Twilight tank. I'm a big tank girl, in case that wasn't obvious. You can also get 25 off your off anything on the Inside Tracker website by going to insidetracker.com/Tina Muir. You get $25 off your order there. And I also want to thank Momentous for sponsoring this episode. You can get 20% off your order at livemomentous.com. And I mentioned that I've really been enjoying the Brain Drive. And yeah, be sure to go check it out. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.